Welcome to this webinar, Running Great Workshops with SharpCloud. So really this is for anyone who wants to run more engaging and collaborative workshops, and at any stage, if you've ever felt there must be a better way of doing it than sticky notes and post-its, then this is very much a webinar for you. So we're assuming a little bit of knowledge of SharpCloud, but I think even if you're not too familiar with how to use SharpCloud, the concept should become clear, and also the capabilities. So what are the common workshop challenges, and why do we think SharpCloud allows you to run great workshops? Often these are some of the challenges or the problems raised by people when they're thinking about running a post-it note workshop. So, how do you contribute if you're not in the room? How much can you add in terms of content on a particular post-it? And that can be a good or bad thing. Obviously, you want to control and capture relevant and high level or pertinent information, but does the post-it note allow you to collect enough of what you need and in the right format? How long is it going to be until you get some sort of transcript from the workshop? How fast can people transcribe the post-its or capture them into some sort of presentational application? And then how can you build on that afterwards? So even when you do receive a transcript, maybe a PDF or maybe a PowerPoint presentation, how easy is it to develop the ideas afterwards and to keep the whole thing going forward? So really what these typical challenges might lead to are issues such as it being hard to contribute, maybe there being a lack of engagement in that respect, questioning the depth of the content, maybe the quality of that content, and how you can interact with it afterwards, because it doesn't necessarily have a structure that's easy to interrogate through filtering and sort of analysis. You might lose some of the energy and some of the interest that you captured or generated during the workshop if there's a bit of a gap between that workshop and delivering the content. And depending on what format you deliver the output, there could well be a stagnation in that content if it's not easy to take forward, and it becomes less and less relevant. Now, a lot of those challenges could be sort of leveled at workshopping or road mapping as a process. We often find that people say that the occasional roadmaps done every 3 or 6 months are useful at the time, but if they're not upkept, they quickly fall out of step with the activity that's going on a day-to-day basis. So challenges for workshops, challenges for the outputs of workshops, and that's where we think SharpCloud can help. So when you're planning your workshop, what should you be sort of thinking about? Well, obviously what you want to achieve. Is it capturing ideas, capturing challenges? Is it really sort of generating a new information, or sort of trying to bring together information that you already perhaps hold around the business, but just want to centralize into some sort of plan? Is that going to generate into a roadmap, or are you going to just sort of look at a particular theme or particular area of the business? So, really think about what you're trying to achieve and what the scope of the workshop is fundamental. Then obviously how you're going to run the workshop is another consideration, but really with SharpCloud, it doesn't matter too much which route you take. If you can do it face-to-face, great. SharpCloud can support that. If you need to do it remotely, again, SharpCloud can support that too. And if it's a mixture, this is where SharpCloud probably works better than maybe some other tools, because you can engage people who are remote in the same way as you can engage the people in the room. And they can all be contributing and all be doing it in a sort of real-time sense and feeling very much part of the process. And that workshop can be facilitator-led. It can involve sort of groups working together and then submitting their ideas, often like you would in a sort of classic post-it note type of session, where you might have groups of people talking and then scribbling up their post-it note and taking it to the board. You can still have groups working in SharpCloud and then simply contributing their ideas, in this case through a SharpCloud form, which we'll come to, or through some other method. And you can also have individual contributions, so that does allow people working remotely to participate as well. So in terms of preparing your sort of SharpCloud story and the forms to support your workshop, then there's a number of things that you will go through, a number of steps that you'll go through. You'll want to structure the story such that you have the right categories, attributes, and tags. And tags I put there specifically because this is often something that is missing from a post-it note type session. To an extent, you could almost say that attributes are missing, but I've seen a lot of workshops where people do try and capture time frame, either by where you put the post-it note on a wall, or some sort of priority where you maybe indicate some number on the post-it note, maybe some owner. So you do capture some information on post-it notes, but not necessarily in a fully organized way. But what you'll often fail to do is have that ability to tag the idea as it's being added. So in our example that we'll look at, we can simply tag things as internal or external, or is their impact global, national, local, or regional. And you can have all sorts of tags that you allow the user to choose from while they're submitting their idea. So you're automatically sort of challenging them with further questions about, what's the range of this idea, what's the impact of it, or what's the type. So you capture that at source, and then you've immediately got a way of filtering the information. In preparing your sort of SharpCloud environment for the workshop, then forms are a key part of it. Forms are a capability in SharpCloud that we've had now for probably a year or so, and they're getting more and more useful, and through feedback more and more functional as well. So you can have one or many forms in your story, and you might think, well, why would you need more than one form? Well, in a classic workshop, you may capture first information on, for example, the trends that are happening in the market. Then you might want to capture information about what products or services you might deliver to respond to those trends. Now, you can do all of that within a single form and give the user the option to choose whether what they're submitting is a trend or a product or service. But if you want to take away some of that possibility that they may send it into the wrong category or put it in the wrong location, if you like, on your virtual wall, then you can create multiple forms and allow people then to switch between one form and another at the right point in your process. So you've got some choices there. You've also got a choice over who can contribute to the workshop using SharpCloud. And this is something that possibly not all of our users are yet familiar with. Historically, in order to contribute content into a story in SharpCloud, you need what you might call a full subscription, a paid license that allows you then to act as an editor on that story and therefore contribute content either directly in the story or through forms. But forms also allow you to say, or the owner of the story to say, I'm going to allow anyone who I've given view permission to contribute ideas to the story. So that means that automatically anyone who's signed up for a SharpCloud account, they may have a free viewer subscription or free viewer account, they can start contributing ideas to the story. And you can actually go further and say, well, actually, I want this form to be fully available to anonymous users. In other words, when I give this form link to anyone, they can add ideas to my story regardless of whether they've signed up to SharpCloud or not. So that allows you to support workshops with very little barrier. So you could very quickly collect people together in a room, give them effectively an open link to a form, and have them using that from any device. And I'll come back to that in a moment, but the freedom to use SharpCloud forms on phones and iPads, as well as against the story itself, is a very important point. In capturing ideas, you've got the concept of, do those ideas get published or are they left unpublished? And we'll see that in operation in a moment. Unpublished means when the idea is sent to the story, it won't by default appear on any of the views, because all views, when you first create them in SharpCloud, have a filter set which says don't show unpublished items. So if the item is unpublished, it will be in the story, it will be in the data set, but it just won't be visible on screen straight away. So that immediately allows you to control what people see automatically, and therefore go through a process of review and triage and promotion or publishing of the right content. Or you can say that the item immediately is published, so it's visible straight away, because you might want the workshop to have information coming up right in people's faces. The moment something's submitted, everyone sees it on the big screen in their SharpCloud story, so that you can say straight away, who submitted this idea? So you've got the choice, and you can obviously vary as you go through. You could have a form that you first design to be, for example, completely open and visible, available to anonymous users, and generating items that appear straight away on screen so that people see the whole process and operation. Then you can simply edit that form, make it only available to editors, and say that items are unpublished if you want to then start controlling how information later gets onto that story. So you can control that process. You can also in the forms decide which fields are required, and that's quite important because you want to make sure that you try and capture as high quality information and as complete information as you need, but without wearing people out with too many questions, if you like. So it's an art's not a science necessarily, but I'm sure you'd all be comfortable with sort of drawing that boundary around how much can I expect people to be thinking through on the spot, how much can I get from them, and how much is quite reliable to be captured in this way, knowing that you can always share this story later on, and you can always then ask people to contribute further data to it through editing the story directly. So once you've structured the forms or created your metadata, if you like, the questions and the attributes that you want to capture data against, what categories of items are they, what forms am I going to use? Once you've started to design that process, then you'll probably put together some views that allow you to display that information. Also, you might design some global panels that allow you to show the attribute data that's been captured from the form very easily inside the item, so when people click on the item, they see the information that's come from the form. And we've done some enhancements just in the recent release that allows you to now show things like the name of the item, the description of the item, and all of the things, the system properties on the same panels as your attributes that you've defined. So it really means you can just have a single panel that shows anything of relevance inside the item, and we'll see that again. You might want to then ultimately start really making your story more impactful. For those of you that are familiar with using item appearance, you could therefore have images or color driven on the face of the items by the data that people provide in their form. So if somebody says something is low priority, you might get a green icon appear on the face of the item. If they say it's high priority, you might get a red icon. And that picture can really sort of stimulate some thought or some sort of further thinking that you want the audience to go through. And then it mentions test and iterate, because you rarely get everything right straight away in terms of structuring and getting the forms right, getting the views right. But the beauty of SharpCloud is that you can go through that iterative process, even iterating a little bit during the day. If you find that there's something that people are raising as an important piece of information, you can always say, okay, we'll add that as an attribute, we'll add it to the form, we'll show it on a view, and now we've got that information coming through whilst people are energized. And obviously, once you've created your forms, you're going to need to send people the links so that they can use them, and I'll come to that as we go through the story in a moment. Okay, when it comes to running the workshop, then facilitation is really important. I think it's fair to say that myself and some of my colleagues have seen some great workshops using SharpCloud, and also some very poor ones. And the poor ones have been where the facilitation hasn't really guided the participants as to what they should be doing. And they haven't been shown maybe a sample item being added through a form. So they've then been left with what looks like it's simply a piece of technology, a form on their phone or on their iPad, with very little instruction of what thinking should go behind the data that they add in before they press the submit button. And if you start to collect poor quality information, it's harder to turn that into something valuable, because you need more time to revisit it and triage it and so on. So the key thing is really setting expectations and requirements, the process clearly for the users, because then what they submit is not only high quality, but it's immediate, it's impactful, it's got all of the right metadata, it's something that others can interrogate, it can be added to and built on with relationships, with further content, and it has real substance straight away. So I know it's an obvious point, but it really is, I guess, our way of saying that we don't believe that technology solves a problem in itself. It allows you to solve the problem if you facilitate the process in a sensible way. So I mentioned previously you can capture data through mobile or tablet or from within a story. And we'll see that when we look at forms, but that's a really important point because you can have, again, you could gather a group of people around the table. Pretty much everyone's got a smartphone. Lots of people have got tablets. Others have got laptops. So you could be using forms on those devices without anyone needing to actually be in the story, but the story could then be being projected on a large screen so people are seeing their contributions immediately. So it really does allow you to ripple out as far as you like, and we've got some very good examples currently underway and recently completed where that process is really going into not just innovation from an interested community, but rippling right out to a wide stakeholder group and potentially right out to a public audience eventually too. Okay, so just one more slide and then we'll go into SharpCloud. So running your workshop and going beyond sticky notes, this is really where SharpCloud starts to really show its value, which is when you can not just capture information through forms, but you can start to triage it, review it, move it around, cluster those ideas, merge them. So often if you've been in a workshop process using sticky notes on a big board, you'll probably have gone through the process of taking some of them off from certain places and sticking them on top of others because they're pretty similar or they form a bit of a cluster. So you can do the same sort of thing in SharpCloud as we'll see using tags and using wall views and using the merge capability. So a lot of the things that are done in an effective post-it note workshop can be done equally well in SharpCloud, giving you a more persistent and auditable output because every change you make to a story is obviously captured and audited. You can add further content, again, which is a really important point. The forms themselves can allow you to capture documents, images, any resource that you think is valuable to the idea. So thinking about an example where forms were used by a customer of ours, it wasn't actually a workshop process, but it was a transformation process. They had people within their airports with SharpCloud forms on their phones, walking around whilst technology had been transferred, so they've gone through a big sort of cutover process from one system to another. Their staff were walking around the airports. If they saw an issue with the baggage trolleys or the passenger queues or the information boards or whatever it might be, they could simply start typing in a little note in the form, take a picture or a couple of pictures. Those pictures could be attached to the form, and that straight away was then into a central story. So that back at sort of mission control, they could understand which issues were coming up, and they could then report back to people, okay, we've heard about that one now. So they didn't necessarily have a better way of doing it, which was quite interesting given it was such a significant process. You can also add relationships. Again, notoriously difficult with post-it notes. You can draw lines, you can sort of infer relationships, but you can't really translate that too easily or too quickly into something that others can interact with. And as you're probably all aware, SharpCloud is very much built around that ability to draw lines between items, to connect things for whatever reason is relevant. Are those things the same? Are they dependent? Are they do they have an opportunity if they're joined together? Are they just something we need to consider? So you have different ways of deciding what those relationships mean, and not only drawing them once, but also again adding that type of reasoning behind that relationship, defining it in terms of what type it is. And you can also capture information from comments. So again, if you're in a workshop where there's some people remote, they might not be able to contribute on the phone. It might be that not too easy for them to comment on something that someone else has just posted up, because it's not always easy to get a good signal or accommodate people from a voice perspective. They could be commenting on the items, and those comments pop up on the story in a very, very obvious way now, using a little comment bubble, which we'll see. And we'll come back to the last sort of area around sort of sharing and collaborating and using interactive rich screens in a moment. But I want to go into SharpCloud and sort of bring some of this to life. So what we're going to do is go into an example, which is a government workshop example. So I'm going to go back to the start. So this is something that we've sort of genericized from some work that we did with the Dutch government and also with other organisations here in the UK. So really to sort of show how you can use SharpCloud for workshops and start capturing information that might allow us to start thinking about how we might, what risks there might be around sort of the transformation strategy of the government. So as with SharpCloud, you'll often want to present information in a way that users can find their way to the right information. But what I'll do first of all is just show you the structure of this story, just so that we think about what we're trying to capture in the workshop. It's all about, you know, what categories of information are we going to capture, and in our case, we're going to be looking at capturing issues and risks, and also the capabilities it requires. So, given the government's desire to transform, what are the issues and risks that we might see, and what capabilities might we require in order to overcome those risks? So, straight away, we've got some categorization. We've then got some very simple metrics here that might allow us to talk about our confidence in maybe the capabilities. How confident are we can take on that capability? What's the impact of a risk? What's its priority? What score would we give it? And so on. So just some very simple metrics, but we'll use these on our forms. And then maybe some tags that allow us on the form to offer people the option to say, is the impact of the risk purely internal, or is it external, or is it both? And what's the range of the risk? How far does it affect things? Is it just local, national, regional, or global? So we can always update that metadata at any point, but in a moment we'll have a look at the form that we've designed to capture it. But first of all, in the workshop process, we might lead people in with a little bit of information about, you know, what the ministers or the government are saying about their desire to transform. It might be a bit of a video that we ask everyone to just consume so that we've all got the same backdrop. We might go and look at the government transformation strategy that's published on their website. And then we might say, okay, let's explore our strategy in a way that's sort of internal to SharpCloud now, so that it allows us to look at things in a slightly more sort of common format. So we might be looking at the vision and our objectives. So what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to get better use of data, better workplace tools, develop skills and culture, share platforms and get reusable capabilities, and become world-class digitally. So those might be some of the objectives and some of the vision, and you know, there's always a question as to, you know, how that's described, but this might just be a backdrop to what we want people to understand before they then go to the next screen, which is where we'll be expecting them to contribute their ideas. So what are the risks and issues and the priorities that we see within this transformation program? So this is where the form comes in. We want people to contribute ideas to the story, and the form is available through this button here on the toolbar. So show the story forms. Straight away you'll notice I've actually already got 2 forms which are available to be used within the context of the story, but they can also be used on mobile and so on, and I'll come back to that in just a sec. But first of all, let's look at how we've created these forms, and we can just simply go to Manage Forms and see that we've got the 2 created here. So the first form, what are the risks? You'll see that we've got a number of attributes listed down here at the bottom of the screen. Now, these have been selected from the fields to show. Now, you won't get a choice over all of them, because SharpCloud will say there must be a name for the item. But you can mask it and say, what is the risk? So I want you to give me the risk, and that's going to go into a category called risks and issues. And we may want to hide that category. In this case, I'm going to leave it open, but this allows then people to ultimately on the form choose where the item goes that they're submitting, and that might not be what we want. So we need to decide whether we keep that open or not. We can then allow people to add a description. We might prompt them to describe things more fully. And then we get a flag called published. And this is where, if we leave that unpublished, people's ideas will not necessarily go onto, well, won't go onto the screen automatically. They won't be shown on the view. But if we leave that field visible, we don't make it hidden, then users can choose to flag the field themselves and say, no, I'm actually publishing this. So you might tell people, you know, depending on how formed the idea is, If you think it's well thought out, you really think it's something we should discuss right now, then publish it. If not, if you want it just going into a triage area, then leave it as unpublished. You can then add other attributes from your story structure. So you can select the fields that you want to show. Here we've picked risk impact, risk range, risk score, impact and priority, things that we saw earlier on our list of attributes. But one of the things we've also chosen is the file picker. So we can say we want to be able to upload a file, or I might take that out and say, in this case, we're going to allow a resource picker. A resource picker means you could add a file or a URL resource. It would be the SharpCloud resource picker, which does allow you to navigate to your file system, but also allows you just to add a URL directly in or drag and drop a file into SharpCloud. So that's something that you can decide. Do I just allow people to upload an image or a file or a resource, which is a combination of files and URLs? So I've just replaced that on the form. So we've got this down here as our image picker, and we can make those choices as to what's required. So what must people fill in and what's hidden? And we might actually say that you must say what the impact of the risk is and what you think the potential score is. And I'm also going to say that you must also rate its priority. Now, a couple of these, actually, I'm going to turn off this one. That's not going to be required. This one's going to be required. A couple of these items are actually, or these attributes are actually not attributes themselves. They are tag groups. So risk impact, and also where is it? Maybe I haven't put it on here. Let me add it on again. Risk impact, and oh, maybe I have got it on there. There's another one that I was looking for. Where is it? Whoop. Okay, I'll stick with this. I thought I was going to show one of the risk range. Sorry, risk range. I'm missing it here. Risk range is also a tag group. So you see here that we can present the tags, so people will be able to tick which combination of tags they think apply to the item as they add it. So it's a really good way of capturing additional information fairly simply just through a tick box exercise. So now we've sort of defined the form. If I click OK to save it, that will then be updated in the story. But before I do, notice here that you can capture the URL from the story name up here. So if I click on copy story URL, it will mention that it's copied the URL to the clipboard, and I could then send that to anyone who I wanted to be able to use this form. But before I do that, I should always think about these two options. I mentioned that you can make the form visible and available to anyone who is a viewer on the story, or to anyone who gets the link, whether they've got a SharpCloud account or not. So you can decide how widely available that form is in terms of who can use it. But if I click OK, so I've just updated the form, and obviously if this is a facilitated workshop, I could be just capturing people's thoughts and ideas and typing them in here, and the items would pop up on the screen. But often what you want to do is pass that responsibility to the end users and to the groups. So you can do that by getting them to go to the form on their mobile or other device. Now I've just clicked on this sort of expand button here, which then shows the form in a new browser window. And this is giving you an idea of what it would look like on an iPhone or an Android phone. So the form, because it's just used through the browser, should be able to be used on any modern device. We've seen historically a couple of issues with some older phones, but a lot of those have been dealt with because it's purely a question of how well they support HTML5 on the whole. So we might then be asking people to participate in the workshop and contribute their ideas. So maybe there's an issue of resistance to change within government. Maybe that's one of the risks to our transformation policy. You'll notice that there's a little counter. SharpCloud tells you how many characters you've typed in. And if I had carried on typing many more characters, over 50, you suddenly see it goes yellow. And if I carried on and went over, I think 200, it would go red. What it's really doing is just saying, try and keep the name fairly short, because that's going to go onto the front of the box. But when you start typing the description, then you won't get to the yellow or the red prompt until you've added 250 characters, I think, and maybe 1,000 characters, because you're obviously encouraged to put a bit more information into those fields and less into the name. So I'm just going to put there is a culture of rejecting change. I won't worry about too much more there. But you can see then that we've exposed that published checkbox, and I'm going to leave it unpublished for now. So that may or may not be something we want to expose to the user. But I'll then fill in the other information. So maybe this is just an internal impact. It affects us both locally, regionally, and nationally. How likely is it on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe 8? How would we grade the impact? It's a medium effect. And what priority do we give to it? So we might be sort of capturing things in different ways. Maybe we say that's a high priority. You'll see we can then go and capture or upload a resource. And that would allow me to go to the normal SharpCloud resource picker. And I might want to, in this case, go and pick a URL. So maybe we've seen that there's, we found an article about change being a problem or resistance to change being a problem in government. We can go back to our form, which is open here in a second window, put that in, and I'll just say, you know, this is a recent government article, and I could describe it. I can just add that in. That's now added to the bottom of my form. I'll just close that checkbox down just by opening the form a little bit further. And now I'm ready to submit the form idea. Now, because I'm just in a browser that's got my toolbar at the bottom here, I'm not quite seeing the submit button. But you can, on a phone, you can scroll all the way down, so you won't be having this same challenge. But when I click OK, you may not notice too much apart from it did submit, and there was a green confirmation at the bottom of the screen. You may not have noticed anything on screen because it didn't actually appear automatically. But if I just go and look over here at the filter, and I expose the unpublished items onto this view, you'll see that we now see that resistance to change that I've just added, which was this one, and a version that I added earlier on, which is here. So this one that I've just added, when I click on it and open it up, you see straight away on a single panel the name, the description, the other information that we've captured, the tags that we assigned, and also the recent government article that we attached. So we've immediately got visibility of the information that's come through the form, and we can start thinking about capturing further information or building out this particular content. So let's imagine that the workshop carries on. I've filtered this view, so I'll just expose some other information. We might then have people contributing all sorts of ideas from their devices, and we may be discussing some of that in the room. Straight away, we recognize from what I showed a moment ago that we've got a couple of items that are actually the same. So this would be where you'd start to talk about them. You'd maybe look at who submitted them, depending on whether you've allowed anonymous contributions. Because if you've allowed anonymous contributions, what you may want on your form is an attribute called name, and you may want to say, please give us your name or your table number of whoever submitted this idea, just so that you can go back to them when the idea is on screen and say, okay, you know, that came from table 4, what were you thinking? Obviously, if it's come from someone who's got a SharpCloud account, it will be stamped as being owned by them, and so you would always have the ability to look at the item and over here in the panel, see who the owner is, because that's who's contributed that idea. Now, let's imagine that this idea called resistance to change is something we think is really important. And it was originally unpublished, so it didn't appear on the view. I can publish it here using this little checkbox. So through a process of sort of review and triage and conversation, we can decide that's a good suggestion, it's a valid risk, it should be part of the default view. But we might also be interested that these two are so similar that really they should be the same. They should be merged. So what we could do is we could select one, we could select the other, then we can right mouse click and say merge the items. Now the one that we want to use as our master, we can then sort of choose the right one. Now it might be a little bit difficult at the moment, so we've got one called resistance to change. They're both called resistance to change. So what I might want to do very quickly is find some way of identifying between the two. Now what I could do is I could have started adding images to these, or I might just very briefly update these to say that's version 2. That way I can very quickly go and say, right, when I want to select this one and this one, I want to merge them. The one I want to keep is resistance to change 2. And I want to merge everything else that may be relevant from this one into this first one. When I do that merging, you see I'm then down to one item instead of 2. And I can then sort of go into that item and see what information we've captured, what the details were from each of the original items. So it keeps a panel that we can see what came from each item. And if we change our mind, we can unmerge them. So I'll do that. So we've now got the two unmerged. Oops. So I've just lost my connection a moment. I'll just reload. Okay, and I'll just expose all of those other items. Okay, so we can do some merging, we can do some publishing and some unpublishing, and we can then go through other views as well. So what we might do next is say, well, let's have a look at things on a roadmap. So we might be saying, well, when do you think those risks occur? And you might be dragging them around and saying, well, this one insufficient budget after 3 years, it should be further away. So we'll have a look at it, unlock the view, and we think it sort of happens over here in 2019. And we can be all the time cognizant of our objectives because we might have them shown at the top. And we might then be thinking about what capabilities can we capture or develop in order to try and mitigate these risks. So what we might have is a second form available again on this Forms button, again available to be sent to the end user, to be filled in to give us, particular capability. So we might say that a particular capability that we require is social media skills. I could describe that in more detail, to enable us to speak to the public more effectively, etc., etc. Just change that. Okay. We're going to publish it straight away, and we could say what confidence we've got, whether it's low, medium, or high confidence. Maybe I'll say that's medium confidence. How important is it? Maybe again, it's medium importance. I'll submit that, and this time we'll see straight away that capability will fly in. You probably saw it drop in here with a yellow border because we said it was medium priority. And straight away, we can again start to interact with this and say, well, actually, we think it's going to take a while to develop that capability. And actually, on discussion, we think we need to start around here. So we're starting to embellish and enhance the information. Remember, everything that you capture in a SharpCloud story and anything you edit is auditable through this panel here. So we'll always see the change that we made right from the beginning of time. Okay, so we've used forms now to capture two lots of information, and we can start to then add relationships. So we might be saying certain things are related, so certain capabilities, like this social media capability, are related to, maybe we need some training and skills in social media. Maybe we need to, maybe there's something else. Maybe that's the only thing that we add the relationship to. In fact, I don't think there's anything else that's jumping out at me. But straight away, we can start to add those relationships. That is something that is typically quite hard in a workshop post-it note session. Now, once the story is a little bit more formed, what we might do is start to share it with an audience, and you can see a number 1 against this particular item. I'm going to come back to that in just a moment, but that tells me straight away that someone else has commented on that item, that GDPR item, since I last looked at it. So these comment bubbles will appear on a person-by-person basis to tell you what you haven't looked at yet and what's been contributed since you last opened that item. But before we go through that, let's just go through a couple of the other views. What we may want to do is also capture information via what we call likes and dislikes in SharpCloud. But that again is something that we'll come to, because it happens to be you need a SharpCloud account for that. So let's come back to that. We might just present everything in a simple table. So sometimes you just want people to see that you've captured things, you know, what the list of ideas is, get them to contribute further. You can again just right mouse click and open the item, review its details, and continue to build it out. You might start to use item appearance and interesting backgrounds to really get people to think quite creatively. You know, so now when you see when you say something is highly important, it's got a red triangle on it. So this is coming from the data that people are submitting. So straight away we're starting to be able to say, certain people are seeing these things as really important. Let's start with those. Let's discuss those first. We can have backgrounds that allow us to filter and what we call fit and clip the background, so that we're always aware as we filter where we are in that sort of landscape of sort of critical and high impact down to things that are more benign in the bottom left. So experimenting with the view options to put backgrounds, to put different appearance on the items can really help people to think in a particular way during the workshop. And as I mentioned, you can also cluster ideas. So previously we did it through maybe merging items, think about merging them. But here what we might do is just start saying, well, actually, we think there are some, you know, some things that are cultural. So maybe it's to do with, you know, skills and resistance to change. These are cultural things that we need to address. Maybe there's other things to do with strategy or policy. You know, maybe actually that goes up here as well. Maybe that disjointed processes because we've got disparate technologies and systems, other technology issues. So we can start to just position things in approximate groups and start to think about how they work together. And then we can just lasso them, which is a quick way of selecting them. And we might then add a tag to them. So we might say, well, these are technology types of issues. So we're starting to then add a little bit extra metadata to our captured information. And we can then simply, using the quick filter here where we've got tags shown, quickly isolate the things that are to do with technology, or the things that are not to do with technology. Maybe we've dealt with technology issues, we want to deal with cultural and process and people changes. So a very easy way of just adding that sort of element of clustering and filtering to your data. Okay, so once you've created your story and you've got people contributing through the forms, it's then a question of, right, the workshop maybe is concluded, how do we make this available for people to continue their journey? Now that's where sharing comes in. So you can share a story with any combination of people. When you first look at your story, if you've created it initially, you'll be the owner, and at the very start, no one will have access to it. But what you can do is you can put the story in a team area, and then you can say, well, anyone who's a member of the team, I'm going to give you view, edit, or admin permissions. And you can vary this through time. So initially, you may want to give people view permissions until they're comfortable with what they need to do in the story. Then you might want to give them edit permission, because you're saying, right, now is a phase where we really need you to add new information, to challenge the story, to, you know, to give us all of your feedback. And then once you've got to a certain point, you close that back down. You say, okay, I'm going to give you view permissions again now, so you can't change it, but you can still comment. So you're managing it sort of en masse as a set of permissions. And then you can share it with individuals. So I've shared it here with Gabriel Boston, and I'm going to go into Gabriel's view of the world, and I'm just going to refresh this story because I made a couple of changes to the forms, etc. a moment ago. Okay, so Gabriel has actually just got a view-only license, so he's being prompted to buy a license, but maybe doesn't want to at the moment. And he can go through the various views and look at the content and maybe see, what we've positioned where. And then he might start to think, actually, now I've got access to the story, I want to give a bit of feedback by liking or disliking these items. So one of the things you can do in SharpCloud is anyone who has access to the story with view permissions can open up an item, and they can do a couple of things to give their feedback. They can say, yep, I think this is a good idea, I agree with the risk, or no, I don't think it's a risk, there's something I disagree with. Now, it's a very sort of black and white or binary sort of way, or maybe not binary because you've got three options really, which is none or thumbs up, thumbs down. But it is a very useful way of saying, what is the opinion? So here, if I maybe say, I'm giving a thumbs down to GDPR because I don't think this is a risk, maybe I know something, then I've assigned my one vote, and if I just come out of the item, you'll see that GDPR has now moved up here, so it's got one dislike. If we're back in the other story, and if at the same time me as Antu, I was going through and saying, I actually agree, I don't think this is a risk anymore. If I go back to Gabriel's story, you see that that's moved up to number 2 here. So dynamic real-time updates. And Gabriel might also add a comment to the story. So even as a free viewer, he might say, I've attached the latest policy or strategy on GDPR. So if he's done that, he could then send that as a comment to the story. Now, before I click send, you may be aware that you can decide whether comments are submitted directly, just to the story, or sent to all of the subscribers by email as well. Now, subscribers are anyone who's been into the story because they automatically get subscribed to it. So if this was a really, really important update that was relevant to all of the people, they should all by default get this as a comment because they need to act on it, then I could tick that box and say send it as an email. Otherwise, it will just be posted in the story. Now, you'll notice that comment is posted. In a moment, we'll go and see how that appears to me in my story, having been posted here by Gabriel in his view of the story. But just to make you aware that you can always control the your preferences around how you receive information. Now, free viewers, people with a free SharpCloud account, will only be able to get updates on a weekly basis by email, so they won't be getting instant notifications. If you upgrade to a full SharpCloud license, as I've got, and I'll go back to my version of the story now, I will then get notifications as they happen if somebody posts them via email. But again, I can control my preferences to a further level of granularity, saying whether I want things as they happen on a daily digest and or a weekly digest. And I tend to ask for all three because I'll miss some of the initial comments. I'll then check on the daily digest, maybe on the way home. And perhaps if I've had a week where I've not been able to get to things too well, I'll check the weekly digest when that comes through. But what you'll notice is, because Gabriel commented on the story, there's now 2 comments against the GDPR icon or item, and that will be something I see on any view that I'm looking at. So if I've gone to this view and I show all of the items, I'll again see that those comments on GDPR. So, sorry, I'm just trying to find my right view. Okay, I've gone back to the wrong person. Sorry, I've gone back to Gabriel. So if I go back to me in this view and I unearth all of them, you'll see those 2 comments. And those comments I can expose by first of all opening the comment panel, because this is where I'll see all of the comments left by anybody on this story right through to the beginning of time. But the moment I go into the GDPR icon or item, so I open it up, you'll notice that it filters to say I'm now showing or seeing comments for GDPR. So I can see Gabriel's latest couple of comments. I can respond, or I might think, okay, great, I've got it. And now, because I've read those comments, the 2 has disappeared. So that's me having caught up with the activity on this roadmap story. Okay, so we're going to just come back to PowerPoint to summarize. So what I just covered there really is that you can share your story very easily. So I'm just going to come through to the post-workshop story development. This is where you've seen that you can assign permissions. We've talked a little bit about working with teams and sort of elevating permissions all in one go. You can capture feedback, you can manage email preferences, and you can sort of give your feedback in a sort of voting type sense. You can also encourage people to carry on adding ideas to the story even when they're in it. And maybe you find it easier to use a form within a panel. So I'll very quickly show you that in this story. So let's imagine that this story has developed over a period of time, and we've introduced a lot of people to it. They've understood what we're trying to achieve. Some of them have maybe come to the workshop. What we might want to do is say, well, after the workshop or at any point, you can still contribute ideas. So maybe you can contribute risks through a form, but that form is embedded in an HTML panel. So this is quite a nice way of presenting the form to people from within the story, because you're not having to go to the little pencil, to the toolbar up here and pull out the form and manage it that way. You're just sort of saying to people, here's the form. It's just the link to that form. So it's just a normal form URL pasted into an HTML panel, and it allows people then to just use that to submit their ideas in the normal way. So I've got a couple of them for the risks and the capabilities. Okay, so I'm just going to tie off before we just take a couple of quick questions with the last screen here. I skipped over a little bit about using SharpCloud on touch screens. Those of you that have used SharpCloud will know that it's fully touch enabled, so you can be doing lots of good interaction on a big screen using your finger to move items around and give people that real feeling that they're moving, effectively a post-it note around, but on screen. Now we've got some other example stories that use sort of follow a sort of a S-plan workshop process. S-plan and T-plan are methodologies developed by the Institute for Manufacturing at Cambridge University. Now the aerospace workshop story is actually available on our public instance of SharpCloud. So I won't go into that at the moment, but you'll find it available in the public gallery or the public library. But I'll just quickly take you into one that is a project that we're currently working on. It's not a sensitive content, but it's just to show you how within innovating in the rail industry, we're capturing information with a group of interested bodies around the trends, the themes, the capabilities, the enablers over short, medium, long term, and putting it against the background of a process that is a best practice process run by the Institute for Manufacturing at Cambridge University, so that people are always aware of what the prompts were, what were they expected to do when they're putting things over here in the vision area or in the past and now area. And again, because SharpCloud allows you to filter very easily, you can very quickly get down to seeing what some of those short-term trends were before you zoom back out and fall back to the full landscape. Now, what you'll notice is all of these items in SharpCloud actually have the post-it note captured onto the face of the item, and that was done through the SharpCloud post-it note application, post-it note app. So we have a free app available in our download area that you can use to take the outputs from the official Post-it Note Plus app, which is something you can get on your iPhone. It's from 3M. It allows you to take a photo of a post-it and it digitizes it into a nice square image. We have an app that then takes those Post-it Plus app images, puts them into a spreadsheet that you can upload into SharpCloud in a single go. You can then start organizing them and embellishing them further. So you can still use a Post-it Note Plus or Post-it approach very well. So finally, hopefully what I've been able to do is give you a sense of some of the benefits of using SharpCloud for digital workshops. And this is really meant to stimulate your thinking. We're always happy to be challenged, but we feel that SharpCloud can fit to your objectives, whatever they are. whether they're to build a full roadmap or just to explore an area, or to just engage people in starting to think more openly. It supports face-to-face, remote and mixed participation. You can facilitate workshops, run in groups, get people to contribute individually. And all of this should give you deeper knowledge because you can structure what content you want to capture. And it allows you to interrogate the content because it is structured data underneath it. The story being available immediately is a massive benefit. I've seen delays of weeks digitizing the output from Post-it note sessions, and by that stage people have perhaps forgotten a little bit about it or lost some of the thread. So it becomes a living, dynamic and developing resource. It shouldn't be seen as the workshop is the only time it's touched. It can then be purposed for strategy, taken in a different direction for road mapping, used as a source for how should we be transforming what we do, and lots of other use cases can spring from the same story. So hopefully what I've done is shown you how SharpCloud can allow you to run great workshops, and we'd very much welcome your feedback. So thanks for your attention.